Wild Sun didn't blink, looking up from beneath the mask, her breathing barely audible despite the rage boiling inside. The voice of Sun King, her partner and old friend, echoed in her head, crowding out all other thoughts, keeping her calm, calmer than she deserved to be. Together they were a dangerous pair, stronger than entire armies, capable of accomplishing the task they'd set out to accomplish today. Here in Grottum, the capital of the Shadowish Kingdom, death was already in the air, and they were its guides. Wild Sun walked confidently among the endless stream of pedestrians, remaining cold and unperturbed. The city was large, and its inhabitants had known no joy for 8 centuries. Since the end of the Water War a century ago, a truce had caused many cities to lose their importance. Wild Sun, being an outsider, quietly entered the dusty city, receiving only a polite nod from the guards. The hot wind lifted sand from the ground, and it swirled around her long legs like children playing around trees. Her height sometimes drew attention, but her modest attire did not. Masks and long robes were the daily norm in this city, protecting her from the sun and sand. She moved calmly, not feeling the slightest excitement for what was to come, though her heart beat an anxious rhythm. Her first target was nearby, ahead in line, and she had no idea she was being watched. The marketplace buzzed with life, fabrics hung everywhere, flavorful food was being prepared, and exotic animals ranging from small to giant were displayed in cages. Even the markets of her homeland were not much different from this one, except that they were on an island instead of in the desert. "I can feel his sweat, sweet and close," came Sunny King's voice in her head. "Come closer, feel him." Wild Sun only grunted quietly in response. With the ease of a ghost, she outran several people, going unnoticed. The crowd kept moving, vendors beckoning to customers, and those arguing over prices. The noise and chaos of the place might have confused other assassins, causing them to make mistakes, but not Wild Sun. She thrived in this environment, feeling comfortable amidst the hustle and bustle. The outer chaos only amplified her in a storm that had long since become her usual element, bringing her a strange sense of comfort and justifying the mess her life had become. The man she was following was a guard, and his high status was evident by the immaculate beige-colored armor adorned with gemstones. Wild Sun quickened her step. It was early afternoon, and the sky was blanketed with huge snow-white clouds, as lazy as Grattum's guards. "Do it now," Nigel's voice echoed in Wild Sun's ears, deafening, inhuman, as if emerging from the darkness itself. She hummed. In the blink of an eye, she was behind the guard. Looking around quickly, she spotted the stalls to her left, the vendors and their customers, and the alley behind a couple of stalls to her right. A comfortable gap appeared between her target and the crowd ahead, as if fate itself had given her a chance. The guard turned suddenly. Wild Sun instantly moved toward the food vendor, hiding her imposing height, 7 feet, like the lucky ones. She leaned over the pit where the chief was roasting smoked meats, and the smell of smoke penetrated beneath her mask. The guard looked back, then continued on his way. In the next second, Wild Sun was behind him again, this time clenched fists, focused on his target. The ways to kill him were many. Her sword, nicknamed Cinderella, was known for its deadliness. With a single blow, it could pierce a guard's back, reaching his heart faster than he could scream. But her own hands were legendary as well, massive and rough. They crushed skulls when the blades weren't fast enough, or when she simply longed to feel the last sparks of life beneath her fingers. "With your teeth," Sun King hissed. "Rip his throat out." "No," she answered quietly. They were already approaching the alley. In a sudden movement, invisible to the others, Wild Sun pushed the guard to the right, pulling him into the shadows. A moment later, her hand around his mouth, lifting him off the ground and pinning him against the wall. The guard beat her fists and feet desperately, but she didn't move. It was like hitting wood. His eyes met the dark slits of her mask, cold lights burning behind them. She squeezed his face slowly, feeling the bones give beneath her fingers. A muffled moan escaped his throat, but he was soon silent, sagging limply in her iron grip. Wild Sun silently dragged the body of the guard aside, shielding him with her broad back from the busy marketplace. Spotting a secluded doorway, she pushed the dead man inside and, squatting down, quickly searched him. From her pocket she pulled a heavy key, hid it under her cloak, and without a moment's hesitation, walked back to the marketplace. The crowd continued on its way, not noticing what had happened. She stood up with a quiet sigh, her tense shoulders slumping slightly. A few drops of blood dripped from her hand and fell onto the stone slabs at the guard's feet. "Excellent," Nigel whispered with wry pleasure. "Isn't that exciting?" Her eyes darted to the side, then forward again. She ran her tongue over her parched lips, returning to the stream of customers. She had accomplished one part of the task. Access to Darwin Deer Sandoa's palace was now possible. Her heart hammered harder. Glancing at her bloody hand, she quickly brought it to her face, hiding it under her mask, and licked the blood away. No one paid any attention to it. Her steps slowed as she reached the end of the marketplace. A massive archway rose before her, leading to a magnificent palace with manicured green bushes and guards posted every few steps. She stopped in the middle of the street, and passers-by were forced to step around her, throwing her displeased glances, but she didn't notice them. From beneath the mask came low wheezing sounds. The arch led to a long bridge, beyond which could be seen the palace gates, guarded by a multitude of soldiers. The guards standing nearby caught a glimpse of her, but immediately turned away. Tall, lanky men were rare, but they weren't particularly interesting. Wild Sun stood out among humans. She was a creature teetering on the edge, between human and something new, twisted, created by her own hands. With a deep sigh, Wild Sun swiftly ran under the archway and stopped in front of the palace gates. 4 guards were standing in a row, holding pikes. She reacted instantly, knocking out the legs of the 2 on the left with a powerful kick, then grabbed the right one by the helmet and, with a jerk, brought all 4 of them down on top of each other. The rumble of their fall merged with the noise of the city without attracting too much attention. Without a second's hesitation, she crushed the skulls of 2 of the guards, killing them instantly. The last tried to resist and call for help, but their fate was sealed. Wild Sun mercilessly squeezed their bodies, breaking their bones and cutting off their screams. She threw her head back, letting out a short, grim laugh. She glanced over her shoulder, making sure the other guards hadn't noticed what was happening. Inserting the key into the lock, she carefully opened the gate. Stepping inside, she climbed the luxurious polished staircase. The cold air enveloped her, mingling with the scent of expensive perfume. How it could be so cool in here compared to the heat outside, she didn't understand, but it didn't matter now. Her goal was clear: to topple the master from his throne. Or maybe she just wanted to stretch her muscles away from other people's eyes. She couldn't remember anymore. With strong steps, she quickly climbed the stairs, finding herself in the spacious lobby. Surrounded by luxury, she thought for a moment, but the silence seemed poisonous to her, and Wild Sun gritted her teeth, suppressing her thoughts. Her fists, covered in blood, trembled. A thought flashed through her mind. Maybe the pain she inflicted on others could help her banish her inner torment. Perhaps, somewhere deep inside, she could still find a piece of herself unaffected by the cruelty. Nigel, however, was there to remind her of her purpose. "Pull yourself together, silly," his indifferent voice echoed in her head. "Our enemy is close," she muttered irritably under her breath as she noticed the guards approaching. Their swords were unsheathed. "Who let you in here?" one of the guards asked sharply, pointing her sword at Wild Sun's chest. Wild Sun became a blur of motion. Her fist struck the guard's face, instantly turning her face and helmet into a bloody mass. The other guard managed to stick a knife into Wild Sun's thigh, but that didn't stop her. She grabbed him by the shoulder, and with one tug she ripped his arm off, along with his sword and shoulder plate. Tossing the severed limb aside, she stabbed him with her own weapon. Blood slowly dripped from her side, but she didn't even pay attention, focusing on the way her opponents breathed at her feet. Now she had been spotted. The sound of armor and loud shouting were fast approaching. She tore toward the main hall, her heart beating frantically as if trapped in a cage. But Wild Sun was far from afraid. She and her partner, Sun King, still had plenty to do. The heart, that organ, still worked for both of them, its pounding the only proof of her existence. Though Nigel assured her otherwise, deep down Wild Sun always doubted whether her dark companion was telling her the truth. A new wave of guards 7 men surrounded her. Ahead, behind the tall columns, were the massive doors leading to the throne room. If she wanted to get in there, she needed to get rid of the guards. Wild Sun made a swift U-turn, pulling out her ash saber and bringing the long blade down like a knife. With a quick strike, she pierced through the chest of one of the guards, followed by the other. Suddenly, an arrow slammed into the back of her head, causing her to sway forward slightly. With a strong swing of her arm, she knocked back to Moore, then swung her sword at the archer a few feet behind her. He collapsed, pierced by the sword, his body rolling across the stone floor until he lay dead against the wall. 2 more guards came at her with knives. She received cuts on her knee and forearm before she kicked one in the chin with her knee and the other with her fist in the face. They collapsed to the floor, but the other 2 rose to their feet. Wild Sun grabbed their swords, crushed them in her hands, and hurled the debris into the owners' faces. As they screamed in pain, she pushed their heads against each other. They didn't die, but they weren't the target of her visit either. Picking up her weapon, she walked calmly toward the brightly colored doors, which she opened with a powerful jerk. The Great Hall of Grattam turned out to be breathtakingly gorgeous. Even she could appreciate its splendor, knowing almost as much about beauty as she did about death. In the center of the hall, on a massive throne, sat Darwin Deersand, quietly enjoying crisp meat, apples, and perhaps cheese. But from afar, Wild Sun couldn't be entirely sure. More guards rushed toward Wild Sun, attracted by the noise of the battle outside and the sight of the bloodied figure that had disrupted their dinner. She tensed her muscles, clasping her hands at her chest, and began to draw in the air in the hall. Her body became transparent, and everything around her, guards, shelves of books, windows, chairs, tables, began to lift off the ground and fly toward her. People and objects were stretched into thin threads as they were absorbed by this force at an incredible speed, turning into nothingness. After a moment, Wild Sun reappeared in the hall as the air around her settled. Papers from books slowly fell to the floor and weapons hit the stone slabs with a deafening clang. The heavy furniture that remained outside the impact zone creaked as if groaning in fear. Beneath Wild Sun's feet was now a deep crater into which she sank gently. Now only Darwin Deersand remained in the hall, looking as if he had been seized by a primal terror. Wild Sun fixed her mask and walked slowly toward him. Her footsteps sounded tinkling, her boots crunching on the shards of glass. She pushed aside the heavy overturned table blocking her path and hurled it violently at the far wall, where it shattered into pieces. At that moment her fury reappeared, glistening through her torn breeches. Why are you doing this?" Darwin Deersand muttered, squirming on his throne like a wounded animal. "Who are you?" Her movements were calmer than one might expect from the anger that raged within her. Every step was measured, her teeth and fists clenched to the point of pain. This man was responsible for killing hundreds of her tribesmen, destroying remote villages, and destabilizing their lands. The war is over, but not for long. They always return, like the changing of the seasons. And while Darwin Deersand was no storm himself, he knew how to cause one. Without a word, Wild Sun approached the throne. The shrinking ruler covered his face with his hands and trembled, begging for mercy. He offered her treasure, power, anything, but all she wanted was his blood. She grabbed him by the luxurious fur cape and pulled him to her. Through the blood-stained mask, her gaze blazed with hatred. The arrow was still sticking out of the back of her head. Please, whoever you are, I can give you." She turned his head sharply, accompanied by a loud crack of bones, causing him to look over his shoulder in an unnatural pose. His body collapsed helplessly to the cold stone floor. Wild Sun, paying no further attention to him, cast her gaze toward one of the windows she had broken. Hearing the approaching screams and stomping, she once again took advantage of her incredible speed, moving to the open windowsill. In doing so, her boots crushed a few more shards of glass. She sat on the windowsill, intimidating, bloody statue. When several squads of guards rushed into the hall upon seeing their dead ruler, horror was reflected on their faces. Wild Sun chuckled softly. They looked toward the window where she had just been, but she was no longer there.